We understand that when you lodge an application with HM Land Registry, it is the end of a long and often complicated process. We know this often means that what may seem like obvious errors to our caseworkers are not apparent to you by the time you get to this stage. So we've designed an activity which asks you to consider an application from the point of view of an HM Land Registry caseworker looking at an application. If you click on the handout icon, you have a number of documents which together make up an application. The register and documents are, of course, fictitious, but they do represent many of the most common avoidable requisition points. Your task is to work through the application and identify points which require further information. Note down all the points that require further information or clarification. Once you think you've spotted everything, move through the slides that follow. These explain both the points that must be resolved for the application to proceed and the points which would not prevent registration. You will shortly need to access the Handouts icon to complete this activity, as well as to download the webinar slides and speaker notes after the session. You can access the handouts from our HM Land Registry Go-To stage by clicking on the icon highlighted with the red box on screen. YouTube watchers can click the link in the description below the video. The next few slides are the answers to the activity. You may want to pause the video as required. Take your time to read through them as they highlight all the issues with the application and how they could be resolved. While this example is perhaps a bit extreme, it's important to note that the vast majority of the points covered in this presentation could be avoided with a few careful checks before lodging an application. Please pause the webinar now to take time to work through the activity. The answers will follow next. The first point to go through is the name variations across the documents. There was a discrepancy in the middle name and surname for Paul Jonathan Phillips. Is the middle name Jonathan or Jonathan? And is Phillips to be spelt with one L or two L's? For Mary Ann Jones, there was a discrepancy as to Mary's middle name. Was this to be Anne with an E or Anne without an E? For Barbara Brown, there was an additional middle name shown on the probate compared to the AP1 and TR1. And finally, for XYZ Bank, is the company name with or without PLC? In the case of the spelling variations for Paul and Mary, you act for the transferees, then you would confirm the correct names and amend the documents accordingly. In the case of Barbara, confirm the correct name of the transferor and either provide evidence or tell us what evidence you have seen, amending the documents accordingly. For XYZ Bank, confirm the correct name of the lender and amend documents accordingly. Please note if a document is amended to make sure you confirm who made the amendment and that they had the authority to do so. This point is referred to on the slides throughout. On to point 2. Here we are looking at the consideration which was stated to be paid across the documents. There is a discrepancy between panel 4 of the AP1 form and panel 8 of the TR1 form. In the AP1, the price paid is shown as £495,500, whereas in the TR1 it is shown as £490,500. The incorrect document would need to be amended. Moving on to the next point, there was a discharge applied for in panel 4 of the AP1, and the discharge was stated to have been lodged with the AP1 in panel 5. However, you may have noticed that a discharge was not present in the document pack we gave you. There is a restriction at entry B4 of the proprietorship register which catches the application and prevents the registration of the application. The discharge would need to be lodged. Point 4 looks at the Form A restriction at entry B3 of the proprietorship register. The presence of a Form A restriction shows that there is a trust involved in the land. it prevents any transaction for value by a sole proprietor. If one of the joint proprietors has passed away, the sole surviving proprietor cannot act alone, even if they are acting by a personal representative. They are still bound by the restriction, which is designed to protect the interests of beneficial owners. The restriction must be overreached for the transaction to take place. This can be achieved by the sole surviving proprietor appointing a trustee, an additional person, to act with them in the transaction. This additional trustee will need to be specifically appointed in the wording contained in panel 11 of Form TR1 and ID evidence provided for them in the application. Alternatively, a Form A restriction can be cancelled by lodging an application in Form RX3, together with a statement of truth or statutory declaration, Form ST5, which clearly states that the trust has come to an end, meaning the restriction is no longer needed. Specific guidance regarding this topic can be found in Practice Guide 6, Section 7. The next point looks at complying with the restriction at entry B5 of the proprietorship register. A certificate to comply with the restriction was in the document pack. However, the status of the signatory to the certificate was not given. A new certificate is required, making the signatory's name and status in the firm clear. Point 6 relates to the execution of the charge. Only one of the borrower's signatures has been witnessed, and for the borrower's signature that has been witnessed, the postcode is missing from the witness's address. If it was the case that the single witness on the charge was witnessing both signatures, then this would have to be made clear on the charge. Alternatively, a newly executed charge could be submitted. In either case, we would also check to see that the witness's postcode had been added. Point 7 concerned the TR1 form being undated, causing the deed to be invalid. To resolve this, a new TR1 form should be submitted showing the correct date. This is the final point which must be resolved. Those points which would not prevent registration are covered next. The transfer that we gave you appears to be two separate deeds which have been reassembled to form one deed. What can happen often is that panel 12 of the TR1, executed by the transferors, is added on its own to the end of the TR1 form, executed by the transferees. Where deeds have been executed separately, lodge full copies of all the deeds so that we are able to confirm that all the parties involved have executed identical deeds. Where there is not enough room to complete all execution clauses, use a continuation sheet, referred to as Sheet CS. Moving on to the points which would not prevent registration. The first point is about the address for service. There is a discrepancy between panel 9 of the AP1 and panel 6 of the TR1. In the AP1, the address for service applied for is that of the property, whereas in panel 6, this is stated as 10 Trapper Street, which is not the address of the property, this being 1 Squeak Avenue. The address for service will always be taken from panel 9 of Form AP1. Make sure you are certain of the correct address for service before lodging your application. Here we have panel 10 of the AP1, which has not been completed. In this case, the charge was an approved charge with an MD reference, so all details are confirmed using this. If the charge is unapproved, no MD reference, we would need panel 10 to be completed to make sure details are entered correctly. The final point is that panel 10 of the TR1 has not been completed. There are 2 proprietors being registered, but no information has been given in panel 10 as to how they intend to hold the land. A Form A restriction will be entered by default. Please make sure to complete panel 10 of the TR1 if applicable. That concludes the activity. Thank you for taking part. Please let us know how you found that in the survey.